Hello, welcome back for part 2 of my lecture on pre-Bitcoin history. In part 1, we covered prior attempts at creating digital currencies and demonstrated that individuals, corporations, and governments, including the US government, spent more than 2 decades working on the topic before Bitcoin even existed. Oh, before I forget, if you have any questions, feel free to email me at goss@btcedproject.org. So let's get started. Today we will discuss the history behind what I call the technological pillars of Bitcoin. I've subtitled this lecture, Standing on the Shoulders of Giants, to underscore the importance of the work that preceded and enabled the development of Bitcoin. Here is a list of what I consider to be the key technological pillars of Bitcoin. We will discuss public key encryption and the Diffie-Hellman-Merkle key exchange algorithm, cryptographic digital signatures and the Rivest, Shamir, Edelman implementation of public key cryptography, the brilliant intellectual coup of Phil Zimmermann and the cypherpunks that brought public key cryptography to the rest of the world, hash functions, these are basically digital equivalents of fingerprints for a message or a document. We'll see why this is so important in a little bit. We'll cover digital timestamping, and we'll touch briefly on Merkle trees, proof-of-work algorithms, and Hashcash. I'll make a few comments on peer-to-peer networking, and we will finish by discussing how Satoshi managed to get the Bitcoin system up and running, something I call the bootstrap problem. But first things first, what is encryption? Encryption is simply the process of transforming a message into a form that's only readable by trusted parties. Decryption is the opposite. It will be helpful to construct an analogy now, before things get more complicated. Most of us are familiar with locks and keys. If we consider encryption to be a lock, we need a key to decrypt and encrypt the message, just like we need a key to open and secure the lock. Let's go through an example. Suppose I want to send you a message, but I don't want anyone else to read it. This is easy, right? I just create my message, encrypt it with my key, and send you the message, right? Well, if we think about this in the lock and key analogy, this would be the same as putting the message in a lockbox, locking it, and shipping you just the box. So once you got the box, how would you unlock it? You don't have a key. You need a key, but how do you get one? If you think about it, the key itself is basically a message. For example, if you had a good drawing of the key, you could build one yourself, right? So in effect, the real problem is that we need to be able to send at least one secure message before we can send more secure messages. This is known as the key distribution problem. Encryption schemes based on the assumption that at least one message can be sent securely were state-of-the-art in 1970. So how are Bob and Alice, two very nice people who have never met and are under constant surveillance by an eavesdropper, how are they supposed to get started? Well, what if they could figure out a way to agree on exactly what key they will use to encrypt and decrypt their messages in such a way that the eavesdropper cannot figure out which key they are using? That is, what if Bob and Alice could exchange enough information to be certain that each will build the same key, but not enough information to allow an eavesdropper to build it too? The key distribution problem was solved and published by Diffie, Hellman, and Merkle in 1976, although true history buffs will recognize that this problem was solved in secret by British cryptographers some years earlier. But before we get into that, just think about what an accomplishment this is. For the first time in history, two people who have never met can guarantee that their communications are private, regardless of how they communicate. Sure, encrypted messages have been around since antiquity. Since these ancient encryption techniques weren't perfect, the privacy of the encrypted message depended a great deal on the physical characteristics of the messenger. I surely was not built to be such a messenger. Okay, so who did this? Well, it was done twice. If the year was 1973, and you were the British gentleman who did it in secret for Queen and Country, then you'd be the first. If it was 1976 and you were one of a trio of clever Americans named Diffie, Hellman, and Merkle, then you'd be known as one of the founders of public key cryptography. You'd be my hero, and I'd be asking you for your autograph. That said, I don't mean to degrade patriotic efforts done in secret. I think such efforts are important. But I think it is equally important that we appreciate the academic risks taken by these men to bring their revolutionary technology to the public. Very few academicians make their career by being number two. As you might imagine, inventing technology that happens to be a state secret doesn't make you popular with the government. So, after taking the very significant academic risk of working on ideas that reportedly have been figured out before, These brave folks took very significant risks to liberty and property by working on these ideas that the government didn't want them to. Dr. Hellman has given us some wonderful oral history where he talks about these risks, including the risk of imprisonment. Okay, so how did this work? Well, Bob and Alice think up their own secret piece of information and share it with no one. They both then agree on some other piece of information publicly. It doesn't matter who knows this public information. They each take the public information and do some math using it and their secret information. They share this result, and then each does some more math. The results of this second round of math is that they both have the same key. An eavesdropper who doesn't know the secret information that Bob or Alice kept to themselves cannot construct the same key. Perhaps Wikipedia puts it better using paint as an analogy. Alice and Bob publicly decide on a color of paint. Anyone can know this color. They also pick out their own secret colors and keep those private. They then mix their private paint with the public paint and send it to each other. It doesn't matter who sees the mixed paint. Deducing the private colors is not possible by looking at the public color and the mixture. Now Alice takes Bob's mix and puts her private paint in, and Bob takes Alice's mix and puts his private paint in, and voila, they now have the same color paint. This serves as their shared secret key that must also be kept private. Okay, so Diffie, Hellman, and Merkle figured out how to solve the key distribution problem. That's great. But now there are two people with an identical key that can decrypt the message. This doubles the opportunity for what many have called the lead pipe decryption method. That is, you find someone who has a key, and through the repeated forceful application of the lead pipe to various parts of the body, you obtain the key. Okay, let's fast forward a year and look at Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman's implementation of public key cryptography. We made a point of showing that in the Diffie-Hellman-Merkle key exchange scheme that Bob and Alice both had the same key. This type of encryption is called symmetric encryption. The RSA guys were clever. They noticed that Alice does not need to decrypt the message that she sends to Bob, and Bob doesn't need to decrypt the message that he sends to Alice. Only the recipient needs to decrypt the message. Thus, Bob and Alice don't need to share the same key. All Bob needs is a key that he can use to encrypt a message so that Alice can decrypt it, and vice versa. Rivest, Shamir, and Edelman came up with a way where Alice can create two keys at the same time. These keys are a special pair. One key can encrypt a message that only the other key can decrypt. Thus, Alice can call one key the public key and give it away freely, while she keeps the other key private so she can decrypt incoming messages. This is called an asymmetric encryption system, and it ensures that only one person has a key that can decrypt the message. So that's one less lead pipe target. So far, so good. So how do you use it? If Bob wants to send Alice a personal letter, he first needs to obtain her public key. He can then use Alice's public key to encrypt the message. Now Alice gets the encrypted message and decrypts it with her private key. In this scenario, Bob tells Alice that he loves her, but for reasons that are only known to Alice and Bob. It's a secret. Maybe they work in the same office building or something. Who knows? It's not our business. Now, this asymmetry in the encryption process opens a new dimension in encryption. What if Bob accidentally encrypts a message with his private key? Well, since the public key is, public, anyone can decrypt that message. However, since only Bob's private key can make messages that can be decrypted by his public key, presumably only Bob could have made that message. That sounds a lot like a signature to me. Now, Bob is a clever fella. It was no accident that he used his private key to encrypt the message. In fact, he put an unencrypted copy of the message right alongside the encrypted copy. Bob did this because he knows that it prevents someone from tampering with the message, in addition to functioning like a signature. How so? Well, anyone can edit the unencrypted message, of course, but no one can edit the encrypted message without destroying it. Since Alice is equally clever, she and her colleagues realize that they can decrypt the message using Bob's public key and compare that to the text that he sent unencrypted. This way, they can verify that the message was unaltered. We call this process signing instead of encrypting. Okay, so a clever Brit thought up the public key cryptography system but couldn't tell anybody. Diffie, Hellman, and Merkle thought it up too and risked their academic careers and civil liberties so doing, and told everyone. They seeded the world with revolutionary ideas that guaranteed it would change. Revest, Shamir, and Edelman built upon those ideas, made something with them, and changed the world. So, did the internet boom happen shortly thereafter? Did the new digital economy spring into existence? Nope. Why? What happened? Well, the government made exporting encryption technology illegal. I'm sure historians will debate this actively in my lifetime, and perhaps after I'm long dead, but I offer the hypothesis that cryptographic export restrictions, which were in place from 1977 and drastically relaxed in 1996, hindered the development of electronic commerce. How did it become illegal to export encryption technology? The legal history is kind of long and strange, and it even includes a side story where the government made owning monetary gold illegal. I'm not sure I have all the details correct, but my take on the subject is that restrictions against wartime profiteering through trading with the enemy in the World War I era morphed into restrictions on export of technology through a series of laws and presidential decrees, some of which are still in force today. But wait, the ideas behind encryption are published, but the implementation of those ideas can't be exported? Does the US government think foreigners can't read English? Well, of course they can, and thus foreigners had access to the technology. Of course, only those sufficiently motivated to re-implement those ideas, or to obtain implementations illegally, had access to it. US-based companies could not legally provide encryption technology, effectively leaving most of the world without access to it. Now, there was a provision in the law that permitted export of a technology if it was already widely available. I'll call this the cypherpunk loophole. What about freedom of speech? Could speech be used to widely disseminate a technology? Enter Zimmerman and the cypherpunks. Recognizing the benefits of public key cryptography on a worldwide scale, and the fact that the bad guys had already adopted the technology, Zimmerman and crew pulled off one of the greatest intellectual coups of all time. It was 1995. In 95, sending an email or an envelope containing a program that performs public key encryption across the US border could land you in jail. However, writing a book containing the source code that could be typed into a computer and compiled into an encryption program would not land you in jail. Speech was still free in the US in 1995, and it's mostly still free today. Zimmerman and company published a book containing source code that allowed anyone anywhere to type the contents of the book into a computer, compile it, and have a working encryption program. The problem? The book was 907 pages long, and you'd have to type in every letter perfectly. While that's easier than writing the software from scratch, that's still a lot of work. The solution to this problem was brilliant. The solution the cypherpunks came up with was a book unlike any before it. The first pages of the book, when typed in by hand, could be compiled into a small program that would convert scanned images of the next several pages into text. This text could be copied and pasted into a compiler to create another, more robust program that would allow the same scanning process to be performed on the remainder of the book, which was several hundred pages. This drastically sped up the process of entering source code into the compiler. Previously, it had took forever, something like 1,000 man-hours. Now, it could be done in about a day. According to Zimmerman, he later learned that the NSA had simply presumed he cheated in this process. Seeing as the cypherpunks had fully demonstrated the futility of forbidding export of public key cryptography, President Clinton issued Executive Order 13026 on November 15, 1996. This moved encryption products from the U.S. munitions list, i.e. weapons, to the Commerce Department's control list. President Clinton did so citing his powers as president, acting in times of national emergency, which in fact is how the technology stayed on the munitions list years after the law expired. The president also declared an end to the cypherpunks loophole, not by restricting free speech, but by removing the widely available technology clause. President Clinton went one step further and announced that training foreigners how to use, or even encouraging them to use, quote, strong encryption was illegal. The overall effect of 13026 was that there was now a legal pathway by which U.S. companies could pay the U.S. government for licenses to export encryption technology. The dot-com boom began roughly 1 year later, and the rest is history. As a side note, the NSA, not wanting to be outsmarted, had developed a chipset that they wanted incorporated into all general encryption products. This chipset could provide government agencies the ability to decrypt all messages. The NSA sought legislation to mandate their backdoor access chip be placed into any encryption communication system used in the United States. They called this the Clipper chip. Thanks in part to work by the Electronic Freedom Foundation and the Electronic Privacy Information Center, and to the fact that the Clipper chip was poorly conceived and poorly designed, it never took off. So that's a 30-year story of how we got worldwide public key cryptography. The dot-com boom and e-commerce era that forever changed our economy was a direct consequence of these technologies. Let's break here, and we'll pick up next lecture with some nitty-gritty technical details, starting with hash functions.